you just have to organize people, leaders across the city to form a consistent base of kind of educational, civic, I'm going to use a fancy word again, Chris, capital.
Here we go.
Like when I think about why did Long Beach do so well for a while? Well, they had really good leadership that was professional, that was consistent. And that means you have to have a political base of stakeholders in the political class that will provide those conditions in a sustained way and invest in various ways in the schools and partner with the schools.
So welcome to Always Learning. We are here to always talk about learning. And today we have with us Bill Jackson, who is someone that I actually really wanted to talk to for a long time now, because I love people who build things. We talk about education all the time at EdPost and throughout all of my kind of various channels. Education is a thing I'm obsessed with, but I'm really also obsessed with how can we build new things that take education even further. In the beginning, for me, it was just about schools and just about K-12 and just about test scores and just about reading and math. And over time, it grew because I'm just interested in how people learn. I'm interested in how parents learn what they need to learn. I'm a dad. I've had multiple conversations with other dads to ask them, how did you figure out what your strategy was going to be for your kids or whatever? Like, did it carry over from your own dad or whatever? And one of those ways is that we seek out information. We seek out knowledge from other people and other places. And Bill, you built out one of the things that I think half of American parents have sought out to get information from, and that's Great Schools, the website and resource that allows you to look up schools and find out how they're doing on academics, equity, and various kind of different markers. And I want to say that's like 48 million or so people that visit this website to get information about schools. There's only 50 million kids in public schools. So that's a lot of people visiting. You must feel very accomplished, having built something that you worked on over 18 years, to know that we all use it.
Happy to know that.
I would love to go back to the beginning. I always like to ask people where they came from. And what was your own educational journey? It sounds like you had, in looking at your bio and your background, you had a good educational experience. It says you went to Phillips Exeter Academy. Tell me how much of what you learned in your school experience actually carried over to make you successful in the things that you wanted to do in life.
I think a lot, starting with sort of mindsets and attitudes towards being curious and always learning. Being a little bit skeptical and, bringing a healthy dose of curiosity to what maybe you don't know yet. And I think just experiencing for the first time the thrill of gaining knowledge and insight in the history of the way people have thought about everything. I took a path by college that was a bit unique for me. It was rare, which is to double major in both engineering, mechanical engineering, and history. And I did that, as I say, one major for my dad. He was a mechanical engineer. And one major for me, that was history. But I continued with both those tracks all the way through college because I liked how they impacted me, how the task or the challenge of getting through the mechanical engineering courses not only taught me something about engineering and the way the world works, but it made me stronger in certain ways. And then history, writing a senior thesis on history, religious history, American studies, made me stronger in different ways. So I do think of education. I think that was a feature of Phillips Exeter is, it's kind of brushes with various kinds of challenges that people throw at you. And that's one way to learn. And the other way to learn is to fall in love with something and get all obsessed and go deep because you want to. And that balance of both experiences certainly set the stage for kind of how I've continued to learn through the rest of my life.
Were you just naturally a gifted student? Were you just good at being a school student? No.
No, if I'd tried to get into Yale, where I went to college today, I would absolutely be rejected. I was a medium student.
But engineering seems like a pretty rigorous program. So were you good at rigorous work in some kind of way?
Well, I was good at pounding through things so that I would go from complete cluelessness to only semi-cluelessness.
Well, I guess that's progress, right?
Well, yeah, and it's also, I think an engineering education is a great way to build humility. There are not that many students in engineering schools who
Hmm.
feel like they just sail through and it's easy.
Hmm.
Like partial differential equations that'll put you in your place.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even like, and this is the reason I ask these type of questions is those things, I was more on the kind of the art brain side of things, more the
Mm,
creative writing side of things. And I always did marvel at the people that did very well in the more rigorous math, and the stuff that gets you into on the pathway to being an engineer.
mhm.
That just wasn't my jam. It wasn't my ministry. And I wish it was in some ways, because I think that opens up a whole other world of possibilities for you. Do you think that because that was your part of your background, your basis, that made it easier for you to think through when you're building out something like a new product, like great schools? You weren't just a business person, or you weren't just out there selling an idea, but you actually had some knowledge that can help you build the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way of thinking. So, the mechanical engineering curriculum per se didn't help me much with building grade schools. I did, like propulsion and energy conversion courses was my
This is
pro-
totally different.
totally different. Like, how does a jet engine work, which is super fun, but totally different.
Hmm.
However, thinking, I'll tell you something that I learned in engineering and also learned from a mentor early in my career that carried over throughout my time building grade schools, which is go through a period of time where there's a sort of set of decisions to be made and keep as many of them open and flexible as possible for as long as possible. And then solidify the whole system for a while, for a chunk of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually learned this from a brilliant hardware and software engineer early in my career. I worked in a networking hardware company, built boxes for networks. And he was both a hardware and a software designer. He said, yeah, I choose my chips and I get my hypothesis about what chips are going in there, how the operating system's going to work, what the application layers of the software, how they're going to work. And I just try to keep everything open as I kind of gain more clarity. And then I freeze it as much as I need to in order to make the next big step of progress.
Mm.
And then kind of start over again. So first principles thinking, keeping your choices open as long as you can in different aspects of the project you're working on are kind of from engineering to some degree, in my experience.
In listening to that, that's a mental model. That's a framework that you can
Mm-hmm.
carry with you. And I wonder about, teaching our young people frameworks and mental models that not tell them what to think, but give them a pathway or a process. If you encounter X, this is the way you can approach it. Because it feels like, we have a very emotional society. We have problems self-regulating sometimes, and decision making and strategy. I have to say, as somebody who's led an organization, multiple organizations over time, first of all, strategy is not something everybody does well. It's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to have had mentors that strategy is their jam. It's what they
Mm-hmm.
do. And the decision making, like what you just said as a process sounds like a very good one to me. Like maybe somebody should have told me this years ago. Like I could live with that. I want to talk to you about what you built and how you built it. When you think about great schools, why was that the thing that you invested a lot of time into? And how did it turn out? Did you think it became the thing you started out for, or something better, or not all the way there?
In many ways, I think exceeded my expectations for what it could become. And then there's one aspect that I think it's still striving towards what I hoped from years ago that I'll share in a moment. I think the success is just this idea, which started in just one or two counties. Great Schools first launched as a two-county project in the Bay
Hmm.
Area in California, Santa Clara and San Mateo County, and the idea that a parent should be aware of and be thoughtful about which school they send their child to, especially as school options proliferate. The catalyst for Great Schools was particularly the growth of the charter school movement.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there's always been some degree of school choice. And of course, wealthier parents exercise school choice by moving to a particular location. So grade schools could have done that from the beginning, but charter school, grade schools got started in collaboration. One of the key early partners was a guy named Don Shalvey, who has been warmly remembered recently. He passed away earlier this year, I think. And he went to his fellow superintendents. He was at the time the superintendent of the San Carlos School District in the San Mateo County here in the Bay Area. He went to his fellow superintendents and said, this is actually a good idea. The idea that all the parents in our schools, all the parents in our communities would be invited to look at various data about our schools, primarily performance, but also characteristics and features. And we shouldn't be afraid of this. In fact, we should embrace how in the long term, this kind of transparency can fuel both the demand and support for better schools in our communities. And so in that way, I think Great Schools, as it expanded to 6 counties, all of California, state by state to 5 states, and then nationally, has exceeded my expectations. There's so much change in the way parents and other interested folks think about what access they can get to school data. It's now widely known across socioeconomic classes that you can get information about schools. Where I think it's still a work in progress all these years later is how good can Great Schools make those indicators, those quality indicators? I have a sense that they're medium quality, like when you look at the test score ratings or the equity ratings, as you pointed out, or other data that's there, it's really helpful. It's a big step from where the world was prior to 1998 when Great Schools was founded. And yet, as a parent, you would love to have a sense of, is it supportive to a wide range of kids and a wide range of families? What are the arts there? What is the culture of reading books in a particular middle school? Like, do kids actually read things for pleasure? And academically, to what degree are fires being lit? Are teachers attending to the kind of intellectual formation of kids and figuring out how to light the fire of curiosity and engagement? And Great Schools won't tell you a lot of those questions. And, are they even knowable in any kind of mass scale? I don't think that answer is definitive yet, but I think that is a to-do for Great Schools, to keep working on the quality of those indicators.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because if you use it the way that a lot of middle-class parents use it, which is to have a precursor to a visit. So the sum total of what you're going to know about a school isn't what you're going to get from Great Schools. It's a precursor to a visit. It might help you decide what schools to go look at. And when you get to the college level, lots of parents are used to visiting. Like, they look up all the stuff on the college, but then they do college visits, right? It's a very middle class thing to do college visits with your kid. But I think with K-12 schools, we have a way to go with the parental selection process, how they select where their kids are going to go. Lots of it is largely word of mouth.
Yes.
That's like the number one predictor. I think word of mouth is one of the biggest ones, with no visit, like not digging any deeper than that. I think number 2 are some guides, things you can look up, but still with no visit.
Yep.
And I think, as somebody now who has visited a lot of schools, what you just said kind of rang my bell, because there's so much you learn by visiting a school and walking through it on a day. I became a school board member. I remember someone telling me, don't ever tell them you're coming. Just go in the middle of the day and just walk in and go see, because that'll give you a true picture of what's really happening there.
Yeah. I think as a school board member who can wander, you can learn a lot more than you can as a parent on a tour.
That's true. That's true. Because if you just walk in off the street as a parent,
right,
and you're not a school board member,
you're not welcome.
Bill, what's so funny about that, though, is that parents would tell me this principal never comes out of his office or her office, and we can never get in touch with him or her, and whatever. And you show up as a school board member, that principal finds you in 10 seconds. Like, all of a sudden they're in your face and you're like, wow, no one else can find you, but I found you in seconds as a board member. Yeah, I think you're right. If you're a parent and you want to do visits, and it's a more formal or structured thing. I know in our schools locally here, there was a thing in our district where you could pick your teacher. So there would be a night where all the parents could come and walk through all the classrooms, and then you would rank the teachers that you want. And, there's a good chance you would be getting 1 or 2 if you showed up. And guess who showed up and who didn't, right?
Right.
And it is amazing that everybody would pick the same one or two teachers as the top without anything other than having coming visit, took a look at it, and they're like, yes, this is the one. And the teachers that didn't get picked, guess what? They ended up with the kids that, whose parents didn't come and didn't
Hmm.
make a
Yeah,
selection.
right.
It's the power of information. It's the power of involvement. In great schools, I think, goes a long way. As that progressed over time and as it grew, did your theory of change and your strategy change? Like, did you see changes in the world and in parents and, change what you thought would work in the beginning, but you had to make some sort of pivots?
Yes. So we focused in the first decade largely on parental information to fuel choice. A couple things happened after about a decade. One, we tried to focus more on the use case of a school board member or an interested citizen whose
Mm-hmm.
mindset is, how are my schools doing? And that's a little bit of a different question, and maybe involves a little bit more data analysis and kind of ways of comparing schools to each other. Perhaps more impactful, we began to focus more on parenting, a wide range of parenting topics. So, as you know, great schools now has quite a lot of information around parenting, particularly where parenting meets learning.
Mm-hmm.
And we did this for a couple reasons. One is we saw that being able to choose a school depended a lot on expectations and knowledge about education. We had a director of one of our local programs, so great schools, I think less so now, but say in 2015 years ago, had a number of local programs around the country, and one of them was in Milwaukee. And our program director there, wonderful woman by the name of Jody Goldberg, had this mantra, which is nice is not enough. So parents
Mm,
would go to a school and they would basically see, well, yeah, they're teaching me, or they're treating me nicely. They welcome me. Some schools aren't even welcoming or aren't
mm-hmm.
even nice. However, what we found is that some parents ended up in schools where not a lot of learning was going on, but the teachers were nice. And so we wanted to try to probe on that and provide more information and more nudging and support for parents to ask the next layer of questions about the quality of the schooling they were getting. And then that kind of evolved into a kind of natural corollary for us was, okay, well, what does a parent do? How does a parent really understand education better? In part by being an educator. And they, of course, they already are, no matter whether they want to be or not. Their children are learning a lot from them. And so we built out more and more content related to, okay, how does a parent help their child to grow both academically and socioeconomically? How does the parent hold up their half of the equation of raising a kid who will be able to lead a choice-filled life?
What do you think about, though, the factors that fall outside of things that are easy to measure, you know,
Hmm.
about a school? I mean, for the record, people watching this or listening to this should know that I'm on the board of great schools now and have
Hmm.
been on the board of great schools for a while, for one reason, which is because I used to use the site before I even knew anybody involved with it at all. So when it came around for me actually meeting people who worked there, I thought it was a big deal. I was like, oh my God, you guys are the actual people. And then being on the board, I've learned a lot over time. I was one of the kind of hawks in the beginning. I was very hawkish about math and reading, and all the equity scores and the other stuff to me felt a little bit kind of kind of a little bit fuzzy,
Hmm.
in comparison to, because I was an accountability hawk, right, at the
Right.
time. I've grown, I've changed over time, but I still think that it's kind of hard to measure those other things. And at the end of the day, if your kid can't read, and you're saying, yeah, but we do great on all these other things. I haven't been able to balance that out for my own thinking, being a hawk on that stuff on one side, but also thinking the other stuff is important. I haven't reached the balance.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is true that those math and reading scores are substantially a function of both what happens in school and what happens outside of school. So you can be a pretty lousy team of educators in Palo Alto, California, and
Hmm.
do well on your math and reading scores, and be a pretty good team of educators in a community, say across the bay, which is far much lower income, a lot more second language learning, less stable families, a lot less money to throw at enrichment, and your scores are going to be lower on an absolute basis, even if you're a substantially better team of educators. So that's really important context. So grade schools, as you know, then has a growth rating, where especially in some states provide better data than other states about this. But that's I think a really important lens. The equity rating, I think, is really tricky because if you sort of look beneath the layers of how it's built, I think it's a useful kind of signal for some schools that are really doing some great things. And then there are some schools that really have a problem there. But kind of in the middle, I think it's really rough to make judgments using that score. That's my own personal opinion. Even when it comes to the data itself, interpreting causally what drove that particular score is a worthwhile question to ask.
And it might be subjective in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's no,
those things,
you can try to adjust for socioeconomic factors. Grade schools has tried that at times. I'll never forget we had done that, and we showed this particular. We were doing a focus group with parents, and this was in a low income. I think it was in Redwood City, California, in a school community which was pretty low income. And that particular school looked good on that rating. And then a parent said, "Okay, so you're saying this is a good school for poor kids?" And that really made us rethink. Okay, well, maybe that framing isn't quite right. So it's a tricky question as to how to take the data that's available and turn it into the most useful and also fair assessment of the school and not just the community, and trying to tease apart what is the school doing versus what's going on in the community around it.
You were able to lead great schools through a time that was somewhat of like the golden age of NCLB, No Child Left Behind,
right,
where it was pretty clear there was a consensus around the importance of data, information, standards, accountability, interventions when schools weren't doing well over periods of time, ratings of teacher quality. There was a whole bunch of things. I mean, I think we generally, when we think about NCLB, we just focus on the fact that there was, a mandate of testing annually and only in two things. Well, actually, it was more than two things. There's also that science. I like to always remind people that science is the third score, and no one pays attention to that one because it's universally horrible. It's so bad that people don't even want to look at it. And it's bad for everybody. It doesn't matter your class, whatever your race. But it also called for other things like making sure that you distributed high quality teachers well, and you had to report on how you were doing that, and that you were going to intervene after a school underperformed for a certain amount of time. So that was kind of the golden age. Does it worry you that it feels like much of that is gone? Much of the focus on outcomes is not there anymore.
Yeah, it does worry me. In spite of all that I just said, I think the bottom line is, you should run a school and you should seek a school as a parent that produces reading and math proficiency and science proficiency, up to a certain reasonably impressive level of achievement. And, in some ways, okay, so I've just described some problems and challenges with the data, but certainly worse is to stick your head in the sand and say, we don't care about it. Because there are a dishearteningly large number of schools where quite a high percentage of kids are not building, are not gaining the skills they need to. I think there was one of my favorite, a mentor also shared this framework, to lead a choice-filled life. That's what you want, right? What you're going to be is up to you, but if you come out of your K-12 schooling with the option to go to college or not, but you have the ability to read, write, think critically, seek out information, analyze and judge information given to you, and also some quantitative analysis, then you could just do so much. But there's a lot of schools where kids aren't getting those things, and the data is critical so that we can see where they are. And that was the impetus behind NCLB. I do think the design of the legislation was a little bit crazy as I think back on it all these years later. But I think that the spirit was right on.
Well, I mean, we were going to be 100% proficient by 2014, right?
Right. It's sort of like, it's as if Congress passed a law saying that we're going to be 100% happy by the year 2014, and sadness was
Yes.
no longer permitted in the country.
Right. We'll have world peace by 2034.
You're right.
There'll be no more animosity between people. In some ways, though, I get the silliness of 100% proficiency goal by 2014, which would have been like 13 years after it passed. So, like a little over a decade, we will get there, 100% proficiency. I also get the premise of if you shoot for the moon, at least you're among the stars, right? And achievement was going up during that period. Little known
Yeah.
fact to most people in America who think it was a failure, actually achievement was going up.
Yep.
And once they started getting a little loosey goosey with the giving states waivers and taking the foot off of the accountability gas, then plateau, and then all of a sudden, kind of over the last decade or so, kind of inconsistent performance. And then I had a conversation with Jeb Bush during the pandemic, right in the middle, and I said, states are going to take a data vacation. They're going to use the pandemic as a a good break to be able to take a data vacation. And then what we're going to come back to is a generation of kids where we don't know where they are.
Yeah.
Like I'm predicting the future. And I think it's worse than I thought because it wasn't a vacation. It was like they were going to put data in hospice.
Yeah.
That's different,
Also bad is a cultural shift towards the idea that, well, nothing really important in education can be measured that way.
Mm-hmm. Teaching is an art.
Right.
Yeah. It's an art.
What I think is interesting is how, like, if you look at New York City and you look at who wants to go to Success Academy, and I look at San Francisco and how the school system has evolved and is run here, there's a bunch of demand for schools like Success Academy that can't be fulfilled because there aren't enough of them, because the politics won't allow it. Going to Success Academy is a choice. It's not always going to feel good. It's tough. I've been to a few and there are joyous moments but they're just not messing around with whether you're going to learn and what links they're going to go to help you learn to become literate and to be numerate. And I think that's culturally what we need more of as in the country is how do you combine that sense of commitment and determination together with the recognition that ultimately you are trying to light a fire in a kid. You want the child to, but the two go together, right? Unless you get a critical mass of learning going and knowledge and skills, your capacity to learn is stunted. So even if you're very curious, you're not going to be able to do as much with that. It won't take you as far unless you get, kind of the fire primed. So I think there is too often in people's mind, it's like, well, either I'm like a Success Academy hardcore kind of strict back to basics kind of model, or I'm a squishy fall in love with learning kind of person. But actually, I think it's when you mash those two together in thoughtful ways is when you get the best results for families and kids.
Bill, I wonder about places like San Francisco. So first of all, let me say this, just to toot our own horn at Brightbeam, which is the mothership of EdPost. Years ago, I want to say probably about 6 or 7 years ago, we did a report called The Shame of Progressive Cities. And what we did in that, we looked at the top 50 progressive cities and the top 50 conservative cities and looked at the data, the outcomes of the students in those data. And surprise, surprise, the conservative cities actually bested progressive cities. And this wasn't something that my friends loved us putting out into the world. And I got a lot of hate for it. But there were places like, not remember exactly, but I think it was Virginia Beach or somewhere where the gap in achievement was closed. Right? Like, because we talk about failure, especially in Black kids and in poor kids, as if it's universal, like as if there aren't some places we should study. But the top of the worst was like San Francisco, Yeah. And I'm thinking about one of the wealthiest places in the country, right? Like there is more money in San Francisco than baseball, right? Like there is so much money there, right? And not that many kids, not a ton of kids. And some weird problems. I wonder if you could tell me just a little bit about like I do not understand. You have a demand for rigorous schools and entry to some schools that just are seen as having a better kind of program or whatever. And you don't just expand the seats. Like, what's the scarcity thing? Like, why are parents fighting to get into just a handful of schools? Where's the process of replicating? I don't get the San Francisco problem at all. I
Yeah.
really just don't get it.
Yeah. It's surprising. I've spent quite a bit of time studying it and trying to understand. And here's where I think it comes down is you have two problems that are woven together. One is that the school board is captured by interests that are focused on things other than whether children are learning to, particularly whether there's enough learning happening with what you could call school dependent learners. So, some children in San Francisco are going to, they just need mediocre schooling and they're going to do really fine. But you have a school board that is not, if you go to its meetings, if you look at its minutes, it just doesn't talk about that primarily.
Mm-hmm.
What's fascinating is how the political culture of San Francisco allows it to talk about or wants it to talk about a lot of equity issues, except that one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, the names of schools, whether a mural will stay on the walls of George Washington High School that depicts slavery, what the racial and ethnic balance of teachers and staff is, and who's on what committee, all that gets a great deal of attention, and a lot of other issues as well, too. But the fact that the San Francisco schools are, if you did some not all that difficult data analysis, amongst the bottom 10% for driving social mobility in
Mm-hmm.
K-12 systems is not there's no political price paid here for that. And that gets to my second point, which is I think over several decades, on the demand side, the parents and the citizenry has lost its way a bit. There's people aren't voted out of the school board for that, in part because people have just forgotten or aren't clear that that's like the first job of schools. They're thinking about a lot of other things that schools do or don't do. And also one of the problems we have is that or dynamics, I should say, is that there are a third of parents, and particularly higher income parents in the city, that are in private school. There's a fascinating backstory to that, as to how that happened a long time ago, partly. But that reduces the nature of the political demand for change. So I think you add all these things up and you get a kind of status quo. You get stasis and a complete lack of interest in how to fix the problem.
I'll say something a little bit provocative along those lines is, as a former school board member, I think school boards are incredibly important because they make the decision. What are kids going to learn? How the money's going to be allocated? Where the buses are going to go? How the bus routes are going to work? I mean, they're the ones. That's where, the buck stops with them. I also think that mayors get off the hook for having to make sure that the children in their jurisdiction are also on their map, right? Like mayors will tell you, I'm not part of the schools. I don't run the schools or whatever. And it's like, no, this is in your city. These are San Francisco children. And you have vested interest in whether or not they are doing well or not. And a bully pulpit. But the public themselves don't seem to know very much about the school board. Many of the voters in many cities don't even have kids in the schools.
Right.
Right. So when it comes down to choosing who's going to run the most important institution in your city, oftentimes you have no idea who you should, there's some of us, I don't know how it is for you, but in Minnesota, when we vote, there's these water and soil commissioner and stuff like that. And I'm like, I have no opinion about that. I do not know. And it's kind of like, what do? You just check anything or what? Well, I imagine for a lot of people, school board is like the water and soil commissioner, and that's how you get wacky people.
And San Francisco has one of the lowest percentages of children per capita of a major American city, which doesn't help. And you see, some cities have therefore gotten rid of their school boards, and the schools report to the mayor, or the school boards have circumscribed powers. I've always wondered. New Orleans, as I'm sure you know very well, reorganized its school system entirely after Hurricane Katrina. And I think I'm very intrigued by how such a system could work kind of on the other end of the socioeconomic spectrum, in terms of a city, which is San Francisco, so much
Hmm.
wealth. There have been, I counted recently, a dozen private schools started in the city in the last dozen years or so. There's incredible energy and interest in education amongst the tech type, all the tech
Hmm.
workers here in the
Hmm.
city. As you said before, lots of money. What if we did what Paul Hill and his friends suggested years and years ago with the portfolio model and said, okay, we're going to take the school board out of the business of running the schools and we're going to basically charterize the whole district, and it'll take a decade to do. But what we're going to end up with is this board that essentially determines which nonprofits are worthy of which school buildings based on a kind of combination of data analysis and carefully listening to the communities.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think that would work really well here.
Okay, I'm not so bullish on that idea. Just because of New Orleans as the example, New Orleans is the Colin Powell thing. For those of us that support charter schools as a means of creating opportunities for students that they don't have, as a means for allowing educators to start schools that they couldn't start within the bureaucracy, all that. That's me. I live in the Minnesota, the birthplace of charters. Thank
Yep.
you, and you're
Yep.
welcome to the rest of the country. You guys are welcome for that. But then I look at a New Orleans where it got 100% charterized, and it's still a crap show there, and you have a lot of DNF schools. As a matter of fact, you have a majority of D, F, and C schools, not a ton of like A and B schools there. So in some ways, it's replicating the old system, because the old system, you used to have the parochial schools, you had the magnets that were selective, that the upper working class and middle class got into, and then you had middle class schools, and then you had a lot of underclass schools. And right now
Mhm.
with the charter system there, you have almost that exact template. You have a lot of underclass, low performing, low quality, low expectation charter schools,
Mhm.
and then you have some that fit more of the success model, the model of high expectations for
Right.
kids and whatever.
Yeah.
But I'd love to see it in a place where, like, I think Indy gets it more right
Hmm.
than New Orleans. Indy has this portfolio, this blend, maybe of what Denver had years ago, like a portfolio model, you
Right.
know.
There's a core school district. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's also a good approach. My understanding of the data in New Orleans is quite a bit more optimistic than yours, but in terms of,
Oh, it's better there. I mean, I went to New Orleans public schools before the hurricane, and I
uh,
just want people to know this. I mean, well before the hurricane, but I want people to know that I need to be critical of my own things that I like charters, as much as I would anything else. But on the
right.
day of Hurricane Katrina, there was a article in Seattle Times that about New Orleans, calling it the most corrupt district in the United States. This is before the hurricane and everything. And it was so corrupt that I love to say this to people and tell people this. There was an FBI office in the school district because it saved them time to get there.
Oh, oh,
That's how many investigations they had going on. And
geez.
multiple people went to jail,
Hmm.
afterwards or whatnot. So yeah, it's better than it was. But now it's kind of like I said, the Colin Powell thing. It's 15 years later. Actually, it's more than 15 years. It's almost 20 years later.
Yeah, it's coming up.
So the status quo there now is charters.
What do you like about what Indianapolis has done?
So in Indy, they had a very mature political class, for one, that was competent. That's not something New Orleans had. New Orleans had a
Yep.
third world political class of people. I wouldn't entrust them with anything. So Indy had that. They didn't have a lot of like political discord in the thing that they were attempting to do, because they had, I think, a pretty solid foundation in their political class, and they had a great plan, and they were looking for a range of types of schools. So from charters, and then even now there's like innovation schools within the district, which to me I think is something you have to keep the district on the hook also for innovating.
Hmm.
If you just try and build everything outside of the district, but you leave a bunch of kids in the district with no mandate to improve, no mandate to. So, I mean, part of that mandate is they're running charter like schools in the
Yep.
district. And it's putting them on the hook for like having to like, innovate. And then they also have, I think they have some form of like vouchers or choice, there. Again, I used to be more bullish on that, not as bullish anymore, but it is, I think, a pretty robust ecosystem of choices,
Hmm.
like lots of different options for different levels of parent. And you haven't heard a lot of crazy stuff come out of Indiana, have you? You haven't heard
No,
a bunch of, discord.
I've, I've heard good things about a number
Great
of
things.
schools there. It's an interesting challenge. Government is sort of designed to do things more on a mass scale at an acceptable level of quality, right? If you think
Mm-hmm.
about street cleaning or building a new road or various things that government does, education is so personal and so human, and the return to education has just gone up. So how to organize a government driven run system that's going to produce a really high level of quality is one of the in education is one of the biggest challenges out there, in my opinion.
As somebody who travels a lot, and I don't live in a big city, I live in kind of rural, it strikes me that we New Yorkicize the education issue too much.
Mm,
We think about the biggest districts like Chicago, LA, New York, now becoming like Miami and Houston and, whatever, these bigger districts. But that's not the country. There are
it's a good
14,000
point.
school
Yeah.
districts. I say it all the time. And there are a lot of school districts like mine where you've got like one or two high schools that are comprehensive and have a lot going on in them. And people are, I think, more satisfied than in a lot of the big cities because, like at my kids' high school, they have old school kind of comprehensive high schools. So they have everything from shop to chess and theater and just about anything. And they also have CTE. So I mean, they're building houses. For every type of kid that walks through that door, there's probably something for them to be able to find their way. If it's like working with your hands, if it's more mechanical, if it's more academic or more artistic, because it's a comprehensive high school that pulls from a bigger range so they can consolidate the money into a
Hmm.
big thing. That's very different than if you go to Minneapolis and go to the Twin Cities, right? Where they
Hmm.
have like 4 high schools in a city that's not that big, 4 or 5 high schools in a city that's not that big. They're all competing with each other. They have a weird mismatch of programs, at different ones or whatever. So I wonder what cities need to do better to provide kind of a stable main option, the way
Yeah,
that maybe you get outside of the city.
right. That's a good question. I think a lot of the successes in larger cities, like the New York problem,
Hmm.
do come from innovative smaller schools. Like real
Hmm.
big changes in outcomes or the quality of the environment for kids come from that. But the big comprehensive high school has things going for it. In San Francisco, there is real success. I think often kids who graduate from Lincoln or Washington or Lowell, the selective high school in San Francisco, you get decent education at those schools, and they are the kind of more broadly community supported high schools in San Francisco.
Hmm.
There's some others too, but those are primary ones. When you have a lot of unity and a lot of investment from your whole community, and you have kind of the right size communities, obviously, if you're a rural community which lacks enough kind of intellectual capital within it, it could be harder to
Oh,
run a good high
stop
school.
it. Stop it, Mr. Fancy Pants. We have lots of intellectual capital out here.
Well, yeah,
See how
yeah.
you city folk are? See how you city folk are?
Yeah, maybe in Minnesota, which
Yes.
if you
We get
if,
everything right in Minnesota, just
there's
so
some
you know.
places
So, yeah.
where maybe not so much. There's just a lot of advantage, I think, into having the unity of community that you get versus the big city where people don't know each other.
It's just so sad. I love San Francisco. It's one of my favorite places. And I
Mm.
hear all kinds of, political stories online and in media that how horrible it is. And every time I'm there, I'm just like, I'm waiting for some people to move out so I can afford to live there. It's just like, yeah, it's terrible here.
It's
It's horrible. Move out. Yeah.
it's been happening a
So
little bit, but that's reversing now. People are coming back, and I can't say the prices are a whole lot lower than they were
I was
pre-pandemic.
about to say, I can't imagine an American family moving to San Francisco and doing anything other than going broke. Like, and, that says something to me, though. I remember 10 or 15 years or so ago, there was a guy named Richard Florida, and he
Right?
was doing, do you know Richard Florida,
Yeah, I
all the
read
creative
a
class stuff?
portion of his book. Yes.
Well, he was going to a lot of mayors and saying, part of being a great city, if you want one that's durable for the long term, is you do have to think about how much intellect you're going to have in your city. You can't have brain drain. And are talented people going to want to live here? And part of that is the schools.
Yep.
And I think there was a little bit in that telling mayors, you have to be kind of responsible for the education production, the production of education in your city
Mm.
if you want to be a center of something. I don't think they bought that message.
Not enough. Maybe in Indianapolis they did. Maybe in a few other
Yeah.
cities.
Well, see that's what you get for not being in the heartland of America. For you guys that want to live on the coast, you coastal elites on both sides of the country. If you were contacted by a pretty enterprising city leader or a superintendent that really wanted to rethink how they were going to provide education in their city or for their kids, what do you think you would tell them? What would be your wildest dream of how you could restructure a city?
Setting up the structure, on the one hand, so with the core school district, you you just have to organize people. I think organize leaders across the city to form a consistent base of kind of educational, civic. I'm going to use a fancy word again, Chris. Capital.
Mm-mm. Here we go.
Like when I think about like why did Long Beach do so well for a while, and why does some other cities that look quite a lot like it not do so well? They have really good leadership that was professional, that was consistent. And that means you have to have a political base of stakeholders in the political
Hmm.
class that will provide those conditions in a sustained way, and invest in various ways in the schools and partner with the schools. San Francisco has the money. Like we, as voters, we've voted a variety of both physical school bonds, but also other ways that we fund from the city budget to the school district budget. But we don't have that kind of political class that kind of tries to lay down the requirements for admission to
Hmm.
being a school board member, or to what kind of superintendent we want, et cetera. And you see cities where there is that kind of, you need some more smoke-filled back rooms, Chris,
Hmm.
where these things are being, where quality is being advocated for and those standards are being upheld. I would also then say, okay, let's on top of that layer one or more types of choice and systems that are, or elements of our system that are designed to unleash the energies of competent creative educators so that we can particularly address the long-standing really difficult parts of education in our city. Certain corners have not been well served for a long time. Certain
Hmm.
groups of people are not doing well. We can look at data, we can look at parent satisfaction, family satisfaction, and we can innovate and see if we can improve those measures. Whether that be, and I think I'm open to, I think, some combination of like ESAs, vouchers, that kind of thing, or charterizing in a kind of more organized way, the way DC does it with a charter
Hmm.
school board. I do think kind of like ad hoc, a little bit here and a little bit there, and the school district doesn't really pay attention. As the chartering agency, it doesn't work very well. But if you have a group that's responsible for bringing in and supporting high quality charters, that works much better.
Well, in Indy, the charter authorizer was the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
So there was like a lot of quality control on who could, like in Minnesota, we had 33 authorizers, and now we're down to 11 because they thought, okay, this is too many. Well, 11 is still more than a lot of places had. That's a lot of
Yeah.
authorizers. In our
Mhm.
state, any community group can be an authorizer, right? Like, any nonprofit can be an authorizer. So, you know, quality's all over the map.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
I think that's a big problem.
Going back to your beginning, you said that Great Schools was more local back then, like at the very beginning. Do you think there's something to be said about relocalizing, like a national database that's seen as like Great Schools is seen as a national now?
Right. Well, we tried that. We just couldn't make the economic model work. So we had great schools local efforts in, I think, 8 cities ultimately. And they lasted from 1 year to 10 years, I want to say.
Really?
And it's an economic model. It's because the local
Hmm.
models were focused on two things. One is localizing the information, so local quality measures, but other information about schools that we could get locally, but not from state or national
Hmm.
level databases. And then secondly, doing outreach so that we get to a lot more particularly lower income parents who weren't necessarily going to come to us, and
Mhm.
walk them through the data, but also the process. How are you going to make a choice? What are your criteria? What matters to you? What matters for your child? And
Mhm.
I think the program did well in terms of its impact. We had some analysis of that, some third party research, but the money, who's going to pay for it?
Yeah. Some of the people who might pay for it are ones who aren't going to want you to always tell the truth. Like, if you wanted, districts and other cities to partner with you,
Right.
they might have a vested interest in you not always telling the real story.
We
Right.
went to Newark, and the
That's a
charter
great place to do
school.
that. Yeah.
The charter schools
Yeah.
thought they wanted us to come, and then we published our booklet. We also did some print booklets. This is
Yeah.
before the internet was as widely as accessible as it is today. And we printed a whole bunch of them. And funny thing, the powers that be there decided those books were not going to be distributed.
They didn't want that information in the world. I'm on another board, which is Ed Navigators, and Ed
Mm.
Navigators are basically like a education and concierge. They started as a group where your employer would pay to have someone come to you on your break at work, get all the information you needed taken care of for your kid, and then they would go back to the district and the schools, and they'd be your personal concierge, like
Yep.
on all your education stuff.
Yep.
And I could see a situation where something like that, where there's a personal touch directly with somebody with a tool, like great schools
Yep.
being able to work together. But I take it, what you just said, the economic model has to work. And it doesn't sound like that's easy to do. I'm real interested when I talk to someone like you. I could ask you a million questions, but like, what are you racing towards to be the legacy that you want to leave behind? Like when you have that cup of Folgers and you're sitting on your retirement couch.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Yeah.
it's not Folgers in a great city like San Francisco, but when you kick the shoes off and you're good for life. Like, what do you want to be the thing that you're remembered for?
I've turned my focus more towards politics now. So I consult with various education and workforce development organizations, and I love helping them with both strategic planning and communications tasks. On the political side, I'm trying to partner with a co-founder and a whole bunch of engaged citizens here and voters in San Francisco, trying to reinvigorate the center right in this bright blue city
Mm-hmm.
of San Francisco, which is dealing with lots of problems. So
Mm-hmm.
bringing back ideas around the prioritization of public safety and educational focus on the basics and first before anything else. Focus on are we spending our money wisely? How do we build infrastructure that's really helpful for businesses and spend less on perhaps various pet projects, social engineering pet projects. So we're pragmatic and principled conservatives, but moderate in our disposition in general. And we're trying to figure out how to bring that brand to life in a city like this. The headwinds, of course, is that the registration for the Republican Party and the number of people who
Mm-hmm.
would say they're conservative is quite low in a city like San
Mm-hmm.
Francisco. The tailwind is that there's so much dissatisfaction with where things have been going in the city for now quite a long time. And so there's an openness to hearing new ideas.
I think that'd be a great legacy. You get that fixed, Bill. You call us and let us know when you got that all fixed, all right?
I'm on it, Chris.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know you got to jump, so we will stay in touch. If you have anything else that you want to come back and put into the world and talk about, it's always open invitation. So come
Thanks
back.
so much, Chris. It's a lot of
All
fun to
right.
chat.